Hey guys, welcome back to another video. In this video, I'm giving you guys my season finale review of Loki, as well as my breakdown for the episode. Basically, how this video works is I'm just going to go through my favorite plot points of this episode, talking about everything that I loved, stuff that I disliked, as well as my theories. Before we get into it, if you guys are new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn notifications on so you don't miss any time I upload a video or I go live. But don't waste any more time, let's get right into it. This was by far the best episode of Loki, and this was by far the best episode of Disney Plus Marvel TV made. Now, the episode itself started off super crazy, and I was super confused when I heard all of these random characters from the MCU talking and saying some iconic lines, and I was like, what the heck is happening? And then I saw the sacred timeline. Those VFX looked absolutely beautiful. This entire opening of this episode was so well crafted, in my opinion. It showed us just enough to get us hype. It showed the castle from the ending in the last episode, but also showed the sacred timeline and showed what was to come in this episode. And that's why I loved it so much. But the main chunk of this episode where we got after the intro, where it actually started, was with Miss Minutes. Now, personally, I saw a lot of people on TikTok and Twitter and everywhere just saying that Miss Minutes was the villain, and she's some sort of a villain, but she's not really a villain. She's working for the He Who Remains, but she's not really the villain. She was teasing with Ravonna when we first saw Ravonna in this episode, but I'll get into that later in this video. But it does start with Miss Minutes, and she somewhat explained who the He Who Remains is, so I think that was a cool way to tease it a little bit. And I was like, who is He Who Remains? Because I know from the comics, I know slightly who he is, but I didn't know that it was Kang the Conqueror. So the biggest reveal in the first half was, of course, us seeing Kang the Conqueror. Technically, his name wasn't Kang in this episode. It was just the Conqueror, which he mentioned that he goes by other random names. But in the subtitles, there was actually He Who Remains. And I'm going to be honest. At first, I really did not like this reveal because it was so suspenseful. Everything in this show has been building up to them finding out who created the TVA, why the TVA is there, and who is leading it. That's the question that we're all wondering. But guess what? They seem to have played it off for a joke in that moment, but as the episode kept going on, I was like, dang, this is really this version of Kang. Now, we know there's millions and billions of other versions of Kang now, so I'm not as disappointed. But in this series, in this season, this version of Kang that we saw is not necessarily a bad guy, and I'll get into that later in this video. But I will say it did feel weird because there was so much suspenseful buildup, and then it was played off for comedy. But that is the character, and that's what I learned throughout the entirety of this episode. And I'm gonna be honest, I did not expect to see Kang on the screen for 40 whole minutes. I was not expecting that. And also, I'm going to keep calling him Kang instead of He Who Remains, because He Who Remains is way too long of a word or words to say for one person. So I'm just going to keep calling him Kang. You guys know what I'm saying. But yeah, as time went on, I really loved Kang's character, or whatever Kang really is right now in the MCU. But I really loved him because he gave me Heath Ledger Joker vibes, sometimes Jake Gyllenhaal's Mysterio. It was cynical but hilarious at the same time, and I think that's a great balance to have, because in this series, Kang isn't necessarily bad. Like I said before, Kang has a balance of what he needs to do, but I don't want to talk about that too much because there's a whole monologue of him talking about what his goals and what his mindset, what he has to do is. So I'll get into that later. But moving on, Mobius confronts Ravonna, and I really thought Mobius was about to prune her, but he didn't. Ravonna absolutely kicked his butt. But Ravonna still believes that the TVA still has a purpose, and she could have easily pruned Mobius and sent him back into the void, but she decided not to. She decided to let him live. Now, I think that this is super interesting when it comes to Ravonna's character, because Ravonna in this episode didn't have much screen time, but she had a decent amount of impact. But again, I'll get into that when we talk about her final scene in this show. But moving on, I want to talk more about Kang. Kang's demeanor was so menacing, and it was just like the acting from Jonathan Majors was so serious but so hilarious at the same time, and I really loved it. And it was just so lighthearted with such a serious mission, with such high stakes. It was so hilariously done, and I really liked that. I know a lot of people get mad at the MCU for playing a lot of stuff off for jokes, but I think this really works, especially with this variation of Kang. Like I said before, there's millions and billions of versions of Kang in the MCU, and that's what Kang said. He said, if you kill me, these billions and millions and trillions of versions of Kang will do the same thing as me. So that's why he didn't care if he died, and he died at the end of the episode, but we'll talk about that after. So Kang explains the multiversal war, and it sounds exactly like Secret Wars, and that's what I love. I cannot wait for the Secret Wars to happen in the MCU. Personally, I think that the Secret Wars should be what ends off the MCU completely, but we'll see as time goes, because I think Secret Wars is still a decade or two down the line. But going back to that, now I want to talk about the monologue from Kang, and it painted him as not a bad guy. Kang has bad intentions, but only has two ways to go about it. He can have chaos and free will, which is what he's not doing, or he can have a sacred timeline, which is what he's doing right now. Sylvie wants that chaos and free will because she had her free will taken away from her. But Loki wants to do what's right, but Sylvie and Loki have trust issues once again, and this is what led to the fight. Now, this fight was absolutely insane. I think the choreography was absolutely awesome, and I felt like this final battle was eventually gonna happen, but I didn't think that it was gonna be the quote final battle. I definitely thought that Loki and Sylvie were gonna fight in this episode. I felt like they really had to, but I didn't know this is the way that it was gonna happen, and I really loved the way that they executed it, and I love that it was kind of the final battle. I also like how these Disney Plus TV shows don't have the final battle at the very end of the movie and then have like a little chunk of like 10 minutes of the rest of the episode. But yeah, going back to the Sylvie and Loki fight, they still don't trust each other, and it felt like throughout this entire series we've seen the relationship with the down and then the straight up, and where they fell in love and it went back down again. They love each other, but they still don't trust each other in the big scale of things, because Sylvie has her mission. Her mission is to get revenge because she was stripped away from literally everything in her life. So I understand where Sylvie's coming from. I understand where Loki's coming from. And it's cool to see these two polar opposites of the same exact character. And I think that's just super unique that you can only do with two versions of Loki. You can't do it with any two other characters. I thought it was going to be Mobius and Loki, the dynamic duo, but I think at the end of the day, Sylvie and Loki are more of an iconic duo in this show. But yeah, so Loki gets pushed through the TVA door from Sylvie. Sylvie ends up killing Kang, and everything, and I mean everything, goes into chaos. But when Loki got pushed through the TVA door thing by Sylvie, he went into a different timeline / reality. And the reason we know this is because Loki tries to warn Mobius that there's a war coming, but Loki's conversation with Mobius and B-15 ends up being for nothing, because Mobius and B-15 don't know who Loki is. Also, on top of all of this, when Loki looks into the main center of the TVA, he doesn't see the three timekeepers statue anymore. He sees Kang the Conqueror statue, and that's literally where the episode ends. This episode was overall awesome, but I want to now talk about the future of the MCU and my theories going off of this final episode, because this final episode set up so much, and I think the biggest thing is that we're not getting any of this resolved until Multiverse of Madness. We have the next project, which will be What If, which I think will go into timeline. Hawkeye isn't going to mention any of this. Shang-Chi, Eternals, No Way Home will probably glance over it because of Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, and I think they're going to be in the movie. If you don't believe they're going to be in the movie, well, so be it, because I can't change your mind anymore, because they are coming from these other timelines, these other realities. They're coming. I think that's said and told. I think it's gonna happen. If you don't want it to happen, I apologize, because it's definitely happening. But I also think that this all leads to What If being canon. Now, What If is just gonna be what if all of these things happened in different timelines and realities. And I feel like we all thought that What If was just gonna be one off show that like doesn't really have much of an impact in the MCU, but I really think it's gonna be canon now because of all of this timeline stuff. It's just what's happening in all these offshoot timelines, and that's what happened in this finale. There was a bunch of offset timelines created, and What If is going to be what's happening in these offsetted timelines. Also, I feel like Secret Wars has to happen because Kang described exactly what Secret Wars is. The final thing that I think this finale is going to impact in the MCU, and this is probably the biggest one, is that I think that once this timeline finally gets somewhat stabilized in Multiverse of Madness, I think that there's going to be a crazy amount of other timelines that are going to be considered canon in the MCU, kind of like chunks of other timelines that got trapped in the main MCU timeline. This literally could include Venom, Morbius, X-Men, Deadpool, Fantastic Four, and literally any property Marvel/Disney has access to. We could get literally a Simpsons crossover because of the MCU timeline going into chaos in chunks of these different timelines being existent in the canon MCU timeline. Now, what next project is going to be dealing directly with all these things? I think it'll be Multiverse of Madness. And even when all of this is resolved in Multiverse of Madness, we still have a Loki season 2, which is confirmed in somewhat of a post-credit scene at the end of this finale. Now, my slight prediction for the Loki season 2 is going to be that the basic premise will be Loki trying to get back to his normal timeline, because we know in the ending of this episode, he wasn't in the same timeline because B-15, Mobius they didn't know who he was. He also saw a Kang statue instead of 3 timekeepers. We know he's not in a normal timeline/reality, so he's going to be trying to get back to where he belongs. Yeah, guys, that was my review and breakdown for the finale of Loki. Tomorrow I'll be posting my spoiler season review of Loki season 1 with my friend Brantley, so subscribe to the channel so you don't miss that. Also, let me know what you thought of Loki season finale in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.